Welcome to today's deep dive. I am incredibly glad you could join us for this one.
Yeah, because the mission we are embarking on today is, well, it feels intensely urgent.
It really does. Even though the stack of source material sitting right here in front of us is literally centuries old,
Right.
we are exploring this very comprehensive classic text that diagnoses a deeply ingrained psychological and honestly spiritual condition.
In the Arabic linguistic and scholarly tradition, it's known as el-Ujub,
Right. And if we try to find the closest English equivalents for you listening, we're looking at concepts like self-admiration, conceit, vanity.
or a really profound, almost intoxicating sense of self-importance.
Exactly. And it's a fascinating condition to explore today, especially because of how forensic our sources are.
Oh, they're incredibly forensic. We're pulling from this remarkably rich stack of material. We
Yeah.
have classical linguistic definitions breaking down the very roots of the words. We've got scriptural references from the Quran and the Sunnah, which are the traditions and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad.
And on top of that, these profound, almost surgical philosophical observations.
Yes, insights from legendary scholars like Al-Ghazali, Ibn Hazm, Ibn Taymiyyah, even ancient poetry. We are essentially looking at a complete top-to-bottom taxonomy of the human ego.
Okay, let's unpack this, because you might be listening to this and wondering, why should I care about some ancient term for vanity?
That's a fair question.
We usually think of arrogance as a purely social problem, right? Like it's about how we treat others.
Right, we picture the boss yelling at employees.
Exactly. Or the person who cuts in line, or that colleague who constantly belittles the team.
Sure.
But the text we are diving into asks a much more terrifying, isolated question. What happens when the ego is quietly celebrating itself, even if absolutely no one else is in the room?
When the mind becomes a sealed echo chamber of its own perceived greatness.
Yes. And that quiet isolation is exactly why this feels so incredibly relevant right now.
Think about the modern world you navigate every day. We live in an ecosystem that is completely obsessed with and structurally designed for self-promotion.
Oh, totally. We are actively incentivized to broadcast our achievement.
To polish our personal brands,
Mm.
to curate our image until it just shines.
And in that kind of environment, understanding these classical warnings against self-admiration might be the exact mental reset you need.
It's not just about being polite to society. It's about recognizing a massive internal blind spot.
A blind spot that, according to these scholars, will absolutely sabotage your own success, your intellect, your personal growth. It'll ruin all of it if you let it fester.
Completely.
So I really want to start with the anatomy of the ego, just trying to pin down what Ujub actually is at its core.
Let's look at the linguistic roots provided in the text.
Yeah, the literal definition describes it as pride, haughtiness, or being overly pleased with oneself. But there is this one specific detail here that really caught my attention.
The part about the trait itself.
Yes. It notes that you can be afflicted with this, whether the trait you are admiring in yourself is actually good or bad. You could literally be admiring a terrible quality, like being ruthlessly cutthroat, or, I don't know, incredibly stubborn, but you are just so pleased with yourself for having it.
The text even describes this state as a residue of foolishness.
A residue of foolishness. I have been turning that phrase over and over in my head all week.
It is such an evocative way to put it, isn't it?
Yeah.
What that implies is that no matter how intelligent, educated, or worldly you might be,
Yeah.
if you harbor this deep-seated self-admiration, there is a lingering incompetence in your reasoning.
You have a cognitive leak.
Exactly. You are fundamentally misunderstanding the reality of your own existence.
And we see this expanded upon beautifully in the idiomatic meanings from the classical scholars. Take al-Jurjani, for instance.
The 14th century theologian and linguist.
Right. He approaches this with incredible precision.
Yeah.
He defines ujub as a person imagining they deserve a rank or status that they actually do not possess.
It's an inflated sense of entitlement based entirely on a distorted, fictionalized self-image.
Which makes a lot of sense. It's like living in a reality distortion field where you're always the main character.
And then you read Al-Ghazali's take, and he pushes it into a much more spiritual territory.
For some context for you listening, Al-Ghazali is one of the most prominent philosophers and theologians of the 11th century.
And his definition really strikes a chord. He defines conceit as magnifying a blessing, leaning on it heavily while completely forgetting the one who actually gave you that blessing.
It's the ultimate illusion of the self-made individual.
Precisely. You look at your intelligence, your wealth, or your sheer willpower, and you think, I did this entirely on my own.
while completely erasing all the variables, the privileges, the fortunate timing, or the divine grace that actually put you in that position.
That erasure is the key mechanism of Yuju. You crop everything else out of the picture until only you remain.
And then Ahmad bin Yahya, another early linguistic scholar, adds a slightly different layer.
He describes it as a joy at achieving something, but it's accompanied by a very specific, quiet feeling of superiority over those who haven't achieved it.
So it's not just the innocent happiness of passing a difficult test or finally getting that promotion.
No, it's looking at the person who didn't pass or who didn't get promoted and feeling a subtle internal elevation above them.
Your joy relies on the contrast between you and the person below you.
Right, but which perfectly bridges into what I think is the grand distinction in the text.
Honestly, this was a massive aha moment for me going through the research. The text draws a very hard line between ujub, conceit, or self-admiration, and kibr, which translates to arrogance.
They are often used interchangeably in everyday conversation, but the scholars view them as very distinct diseases.
What's fascinating here is the brilliant distinction made by scholars like Abu Hilal al-Askari and al-Ghazali regarding this exact point.
Kibr arrogance requires a victim.
It is an inherently social disease. You need someone else present to feel superior to.
You need an audience to look down upon, an employee to belittle, a rival to crush. Arrogance is relational. It exists in the space between two people.
But ujub conceit is entirely solitary. Al-Ghazali points out this hypothetical scenario that just blew my mind.
The deserted island.
Yes. He says that even if a human being were created entirely alone on a deserted island with absolutely no one else around for thousands of miles, it is completely conceivable that they could still suffer from ujub.
They could be walking along the beach, entirely alone, just marveling at their own traits.
Their own survival skills, their deep thoughts. It is an internal self-sustaining loop.
You don't need an audience to be poisoned by it. You're the performer and the audience all at once.
That deserted island analogy is so powerful because it forces you to look inward. It strips away the excuse of, well, I treat people nicely, so I must not be arrogant.
Exactly. You can be perfectly polite to everyone you meet, yet still go home and silently worship at the altar of your own intellect.
And the text doesn't stop there. It provides other linguistic nuances to map out the entire spectrum of the ego.
Like tea.
Right, T, which roughly translates to haughtiness. I know it sounds similar, but the text notes a very subtle difference in the psychological state.
A conceited person, someone with yuju, believes their own illusion. They think they are great.
But the haughty person, the one afflicted with T, is absolutely, unshakably certain of it.
There is a rigidity to tea. A conceited person might occasionally have a moment of doubt. A haughty person never does.
I was looking at another term in my notes, ilal, or presumption. The scholar al-Muhasibi defines this as an advanced, almost terminal stage of conceit.
It's terrifying, honestly.
I was trying to wrap my head around what this looks like in practice. It seems to be the stage where you admire your own work, your morality, or your piety so much that you actually start to feel God or the universe owes you a reward.
You treat your good deeds, your hard work, or your spiritual practices as currency that you are forcing reality to accept.
You lose all sense of humility as a participant in life and replace it with a demand for payment.
It is a complete inversion of reality. You go from being a grateful recipient of life and opportunity to a demanding creditor.
You think, I did the right things, I ate the right foods, I meditated, I worked late. Where is my guaranteed success? Where is my perfect life?
And when life inevitably doesn't hand over what you feel entitled to, that idol turns into deep, toxic resentment.
To illustrate just how catastrophic the results of this mindset can be, the text moves into scriptural warnings.
Pulling these incredibly vivid case studies straight from the Quran.
Yeah, the text takes us on this journey from the chaos of a battlefield to the quiet vanity of a personal wardrobe. Let's look at the Quranic case studies first.
The first one is a profound lesson on the danger of relying on numbers.
Centered around the Battle of Hunain, which is detailed in Surah At-Tawbah. The historical context here is crucial.
The believers were going into this battle with an absolutely massive army.
Larger than they had ever assembled before, and they looked around at their own ranks and became highly impressed by their numbers.
They essentially thought, we cannot possibly lose today. Look at how many of us there are. We are mathematically invincible.
But the text points out that this exact conceit, this reliance on their own perceived power, caused the earth to narrow around them, leading to a shocking and chaotic initial defeat.
It is such a sharp psychological observation. Relying entirely on physical metrics like the size of your army, your quarterly budget, your follower count, while completely forgetting the intangible elements, leads straight to ruin.
The moment you say, my numbers guarantee my success, you have effectively stopped paying attention to reality.
You stop being vigilant. You stop relying on a higher power or even on basic situational awareness.
The phrase, the earth narrowing around them, is a beautiful, terrifying metaphor for how conceit limits your options.
When you are overconfident, you don't plan for contingencies, so when things go wrong, you feel immediately trapped. Your own ego builds the walls that close in on you.
That perfectly sets up the second case study from the Quran, the story of the two gardens from Surah Al-Kahf.
This is a story about a man who owned these magnificent, sprawling vineyards and agricultural estates.
He is walking through his property, talking to his companion, and he arrogantly declares, I am greater than you in wealth and mightier in numbers.
He looks around at his empire, at the rivers flowing through his gardens, and he says, I do not think this will ever perish.
He genuinely believes he has defeated time, decay, and economics.
He thinks his current snapshot of success is a permanent state of being.
The text emphasizes this narrative as a masterclass in how vanity brings total loss.
It contrasts his perceived invincibility with his companion, a humble believer who recognizes that everything is temporary, that every blessing is subject to the will of God.
The man with the gardens has confused his temporary stewardship of wealth with eternal ownership.
He thinks his net worth is a reflection of his inherent permanent superiority.
And of course, the story ends with his gardens being completely destroyed overnight, leaving him wringing his hands over everything he had spent on it.
It makes you think of how many empires, both literal and corporate, have fallen because the founders thought they were simply too big to fail.
Then we have what the text calls the delusion of grandeur. The Quranic chapters Surah Al-Isra and Luqman offer these powerful, direct warnings against walking on the earth with insolence.
The reality check provided in the text is incredibly stark.
It addresses the arrogant person who is walking around puffing their chest out, and it says, you cannot tear the earth apart, nor can you reach the mountains in height.
It is the ultimate cosmic reality check. It's basically saying, who do you think you actually are?
You are a fragile, finite, water-based biological creature.
You are walking around like you own the planet, demanding everyone's respect, but you cannot physically split the ground beneath your feet, and you are entirely microscopic compared to a mountain.
It's a perspective designed to immediately deflate the ego by placing human existence in its proper physical context. You are profoundly small. Why are you acting so big?
And that deflation gets very literal in the prophetic hadiths, the sunnah that the text references next.
There is this striking, almost cinematic imagery of what they call the swallowed man.
The text shares the story of a man from the past who was walking proudly, entirely enamored with himself.
He was admiring his own expensive clothes, admiring his freshly brushed hair, just completely full of himself, strutting down the street.
And suddenly the earth opened up and swallowed him.
He sank into it, and the text says he will continue sinking into the earth until the day of judgment.
The textual analysis the scholars provide for this specific hadith is absolutely fascinating.
They emphasize that this story proves that feeling self-important over one's outfit, one's styling, or physical appearance is not just a minor personality quirk.
Right, it's not just a harmless bit of vanity. It is a major destructive spiritual disease.
The punishment of being literally swallowed by the earth directly reflects the gravity of his internal state.
His ego was so artificially inflated, he was metaphorically floating above everyone else, so gravity itself had to pull him violently down to correct the imbalance.
It really reframes how we think about getting dressed in the morning or the modern obsession with outfit of the day posts.
We spend so much time curating an aesthetic, specifically to admire ourselves and have others admire us.
And the text follows this intense imagery with another hadith about the three destructive traits.
The Prophet Muhammad lists them as desires that are followed, greed that is obeyed, and a person's admiration of themselves.
And Mullah Ali al-Qari's commentary on this specific hadith is vital to understanding the hierarchy of sins being discussed here.
He asks a very logical question. Why is self-admiration included in the same breath as extreme, unchecked greed and rampant lust or desires?
And he argues that self-admiration is actually the worst, most dangerous of the three.
Why? Because a greedy person, or someone consumed by physical desires, usually knows deep down that they are doing something wrong.
They are violating a moral code, and they are aware of it.
Because of that awareness, there is a chance they might feel guilt, and therefore there is a chance they might repent. seek forgiveness, and change their ways.
Right, there is a crack in their armor where self-awareness can still get in, but the conceited person thinks they are already perfect.
Exactly. If you genuinely think you are flawless, why would you ever apologize? Why would you ever try to improve?
Conceit seals the door to growth.
It forms a callus over the conscience. It makes repentance or self-correction highly unlikely because the prerequisite for fixing a flaw is admitting you have one.
That is why the scholars view ujub as the most destructive of the three traits. It locks you in a state of permanent error.
That solitary, uncorrectable nature of conceit makes you wonder how the early philosophers and scholars navigated this internally.
Looking at the notes from the early generations, they didn't just see this as a bad habit, they viewed it as a form of spiritual treason.
We have some incredible wisdom here from the Salaf, the early generations of Muslims.
There is this amazing historical anecdote about Ayusha, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, who was known for her immense scholarship and piety.
The story goes that she was wearing a new dress, and she was admiring it.
She was just looking at the fabric, feeling good about how it looked on her.
Her father, Abu Bakr, sees this happening and immediately warns her.
He says that when conceit enters a servant regarding worldly adornments, they incur divine anger until they take the garment off.
It is a profound intervention. And what is her reaction? How does she respond to that warning?
She immediately took the dress off and gave it away to charity. She didn't hesitate or argue.
It is a radical, immediate response, but it shows exactly how seriously they took the internal state of the heart.
The moment the clothing became a vehicle for ujub, for self-admiration, it became toxic to her spiritual health.
It wasn't about the dress itself being bad, it was about what the dress was doing to her ego.
She recognized that it was better to give away a beautiful, valuable item than to let it slowly poison her character. She prioritized her internal humility over her external aesthetic.
The text also quotes a scholar named Masruq, who points out what he considers the ultimate obstacle to learning.
He states that true knowledge is fearing God, and true ignorance is being conceited about your knowledge.
It sounds like a paradox at first.
But he's essentially saying that if you are deeply proud of how much you know, you are fundamentally ignorant regardless of how many books you've read.
Because the entire premise of true knowledge is that the more you actually learn about the universe, the more you realize how vast the unknown is.
The circle of your knowledge expands, but so does the circumference of your ignorance.
True, deep knowledge always generates awe and humility. If you're studying your degrees or your research is generating arrogance, you aren't actually learning about reality.
You are just accumulating trivia as ammunition to feed your ego. You are using facts as a pedestal rather than a window.
Now here's where it gets really interesting.
The text brings in a profound observation from Ibn Taymiyyah.
For some background, Ibn Taymiyyah was a brilliant, highly influential 13th century theologian and logician known for his rigorous spiritual diagnoses.
He provides a framework that completely shifted how I viewed this entire topic. He compares two concepts: Riya, which translates to showing off and doing things for the sake of being seen by others,
And ujub, which is self-admiration.
This is arguably one of the most brilliant pieces of spiritual psychology in the entire text.
Ibn Taymiyyah argues that showing off riya is a form of associating partners with God through other people.
What he means is, you are doing good deeds, maybe giving to charity or praying, but you are doing them primarily for the applause, the validation, or the respect of the crowd.
You have elevated the crowd to a divine status in your heart, because where approval is your ultimate goal.
But ujub conceit is different. He says ujub is associating partners with God through oneself.
Precisely. This is the core of the danger. Instead of worshiping the crowd's opinion, you are worshiping your own ego.
You have made yourself the ultimate independent power in your life.
It deeply reframes the entire concept of self-reliance versus divine reliance.
When you are infected with conceit, you are essentially standing before the universe and declaring, I am the sole source of my own success. I am my own provider, my own savior, my own genius.
It is a delusion of ultimate sovereign independence.
The text views this not just as an emotional flaw, but as a severe spiritual violation, because you are trying to claim a level of perfection and self-sufficiency that belongs only to God.
I was thinking about how that worship of the self manifests today. It is everywhere.
We are constantly told that we are the architects of our own destiny, that manifesting our desires through sheer belief in ourselves is the highest truth.
We are encouraged to be fiercely independent.
But this text suggests that this delusion of ultimate independence has catastrophic ripple effects, which brings us to how vanity actually sabotages your daily life.
First of all, the text makes it emphatically clear that ujub is the slippery slope, the gateway drug to full-blown arrogance.
You start by admiring yourself in the mirror, and because you need to sustain that high, you inevitably end up looking down on everyone else.
But there's also this psychological phenomenon the text calls spiritual amnesia.
Yes, the scholar Al-Muhasibi notes a very specific cognitive distortion here. He says that conceit causes a person to become completely blind to their own sins and flaws.
It is a highly selective type of memory loss.
You conveniently automatically forget the major mistakes you have made, the times you failed spectacularly, the times you hurt people with your words.
And whatever little mistakes you do happen to remember, you view them as completely insignificant. You rationalize them away immediately.
I only snapped at that person because I was stressed, or that project failed because the market wasn't ready for my vision.
But on the flip side, you remember every single good thing you have ever done in high definition.
You remember every dollar you gave, every clever point you made in a meeting 5 years ago, every time you held the door for someone.
Exactly. Your internal mental ledger is completely falsified. You are kirking the books of your own morality.
And this leads directly to a state that the text warns about, which we can call the illusion of arrival.
Conceit makes you stop trying. You think you've made it. You believe you are already at the summit of the mountain.
And when you think you are already perfect, you stop asking questions. You prevent yourself from consulting experts or mentors because your ego convinces you that you already know better than they do.
I read that part and immediately thought of the expert syndrome you see in a lot of careers.
People hit a certain level of success, maybe they get a director title or publish a successful paper, and they just fossilize.
The text actually calls this total stagnation explicit ruin.
If you aren't growing, you are dying. If your ego convinces you that you have absolutely nothing left to learn, your ruin is guaranteed because the world will keep moving while you stand still admiring yourself.
It doesn't just stall your future growth, it actively destroys the good you have already done.
Ibn al-Qayyim, another major classical scholar, states in the text that absolutely nothing corrupts actions like self-admiration.
The analogy the text uses for this is haunting. It says, conceit eats up good deeds just as fire eats up dry firewood.
You could have a lifetime of charity, kindness, and hard work, but if you look back at it all with intense vanity, if you let it feed your ego, it all goes up in smoke.
Because that vanity almost always leads to behavior that voids the good deed entirely in the real world.
This raised an important question for me when I read it. How exactly does conceit destroy a past good deed?
The text provides a very practical example. It points out that conceit leads you to remind people of the favors you have done for them.
Let's say you give someone money when they're struggling, or you pull some strings to help them get a job.
But because you are so enamored with your own generosity, you constantly bring it up.
You say things like, remember when I helped you out, you wouldn't be in this position without me.
The text notes that this specific behavior completely voids the spiritual and moral value of the charity.
You haven't actually done a good deed. You've just purchased emotional leverage over another human being, and you're using it to continuously feed your ego.
It is so incredibly common, especially in family dynamics or mentorships. We hold our good deeds hostage.
So, if we know it's destructive, what exactly are we so proud of? What fuels this?
The text breaks down the taxonomy of conceit, categorizing the traits that trigger our vanity into two main buckets: involuntary traits and voluntary traits.
And the scholar Al-Murtada is very clear here, laying down a strict rule.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no difference in the prohibition of conceit, whether the trait was given to you without your effort or achieved through your own grueling hard work.
Both forms of pride are equally condemned.
This is a really important distinction to unpack because it pushes back against our modern meritocracy mindset.
Let's look at involuntary traits first. These are things like your physical beauty, your height, your lineage, your family name, or your natural baseline intelligence.
You did absolutely nothing to earn these. They were handed to you by the genetic lottery or by sheer circumstance.
To be conceited about them is logically absurd. You are taking credit for a winning ticket you didn't even buy.
Yet, society constantly rewards people for these exact traits, which makes resisting conceit so difficult.
Right. We understand why being arrogant about being born rich is foolish. But then there are voluntary traits.
These are the things you did work for. Acquiring a high level of education, performing rigorous acts of worship, demonstrating physical courage, building wealth from scratch, achieving immense business success, or gathering a large following through your art.
You put in the 10,000 hours for these. Surely we are allowed a little conceit here.
You would think so, but the text argues that even here, conceit is poison.
Because yes, you put in the effort, you stayed up late studying, you took the risks. But if you drill down to the foundation, who gave you the physical health to put in that effort?
Who created the stable societal circumstances that allowed your business to thrive instead of being wiped out by war or famine?
Who gave you the baseline cognitive ability that allowed you to study complex topics?
Even your most hard-won voluntary achievements are entirely built on a deep foundation of involuntary blessings.
To admire yourself for the roof you built while ignoring the foundation you were freely given is a profound form of arrogance.
That really pulls the rug out from under the self-made myth.
The text also identifies the specific triggers, the external causes that feed our ujub.
The first one it highlights is the flattery trap. The scholar Al-Mawardi calls extreme praise the deceit of flatterers.
If you look at corporate leadership, or celebrities, or even influencers, this is a massive danger.
If you are surrounded by sycophants who constantly tell you how brilliant, visionary, and perfect you are, and you start actually believing their hype, the text says it will ruin your intellect.
You lose touch with reality because you are only breathing the exhaust of your own perceived greatness.
You lose the ability to self-correct because no one is giving you accurate data about your flaws.
Another major trigger mentioned is comparing downward. I see this constantly on social media.
This is when you look at people who are struggling, people who are making obvious mistakes, or people who are caught in scandals, and you think, wow, I'm so much better, smarter, and more moral than them.
The text quotes a really terrifying prophetic warning regarding this mindset. Whoever says the people are ruined is the most ruined of them.
I love how the text anticipates human psychology.
If your default mode is looking at society, looking at the news and saying, everyone is terrible, everyone is lost, nobody gets it but me, society is doomed, you are actually the one in the most immediate spiritual danger.
Your deep cynicism is just masked arrogance.
You are artificially elevating yourself by conceptually pushing everyone else down into the mud. It is a very cheap way to feel superior without actually improving yourself.
The text also points out that your environment and your level of power play a massive role in triggering conceit.
It notes that growing up with arrogant parents can easily pass the disease down to you. It becomes your normalized worldview.
Hanging out with conceited friends normalizes the behavior.
Or, very practically, being placed in a leadership or management role without having the proper spiritual and emotional grounding first. Power without humility is a fast track to ujub.
Because when you are the boss and people have to listen to you to keep their jobs, it is very, very easy to confuse their mandatory compliance with your own infallibility.
You think they're agreeing with you because you are a genius, when really they're just trying to pay their rent.
Okay, so if we are swimming in a culture that encourages this, how do we know if we are actually infected?
The sources provide a highly specific behavioral checklist, red flags of the ego.
I am going to run through these, and you, listening to this, can use it as a sort of diagnostic tool for yourself.
It is a tough mirror to look into, but a necessary one.
It really is. First symptom, constantly praising yourself. If you are always the hero of your own stories, if you naturally steer conversations back to your own achievements, that is a red flag.
Second, refusing to accept advice or listen to guidance.
I think we all know this feeling. If someone tries to offer constructive feedback and your immediate visceral reaction is defensive anger or dismissing their credentials, the ego is running the show.
Third is a very dark one, but we have to be honest about it. Feeling a secret joy when you hear about the flaws, failures, or scandals of your peers or competitors.
The Germans call it Schadenfreude. If their stumble makes you smile internally, that is ujub. You are happy because their failure artificially inflates your relative status.
Fourth, refusing to consult wise people. You genuinely think your brain is the only resource you need to solve any problem.
Fifth, strutting or walking with a haughty posture. The text takes the physical manifestation of an inflated self-worth very seriously.
Sixth is incredibly relevant to the internet age, turning every intellectual discussion into a debate just to show off your knowledge.
You aren't conversing to learn, you are conversing to dominate, to perform, and to crush the other person with your vocabulary or your obscure facts.
And finally, the seventh red flag, needing to be the center of attention.
Taking the literal or metaphorical head of the table in gatherings, believing you are fundamentally the most deserving of the spotlight, the best seat, or the first turn to speak.
If you are mentally checking several of these boxes right now, The text suggests you are suffering from a serious, active case of self-admiration.
But thankfully, the classical scholars didn't just write a diagnostic manual and leave us to suffer.
They were deeply interested in spiritual medicine. They provide a cure.
And that brings us to what I think is the absolute pinnacle of this entire deep dive. It is a rigorous masterclass in humility provided by the Andalusian polymath, Ibn Hazm.
Let's provide a little context for him.
Yeah.
Ibn Hazm was an 11th century scholar, philosopher, and historian from Andalusia, modern-day Spain.
He was known for having a brilliant encyclopedic mind, but also a notoriously sharp tongue and a very turbulent political career.
So when he writes about ego and humility, he is writing from a place of deep, often painful personal experience.
He gives us these incredibly detailed, almost surgical psychological remedies for very specific types of conceit. It genuinely reads like cognitive behavioral therapy from 1,000 years ago.
He starts with the foundational general cure. He says, look at your own flaws. Sit down and really honestly catalog them.
And he adds this brilliant, inescapable caveat. If you look at yourself and you honestly think you have no flaws, then you must realize that being blind to your own flaws is the greatest, most permanent flaw a human being can possibly have.
Your blindness to your weakness is the ultimate proof of your imperfection.
That is absolute checkmate right there. You cannot escape that logic.
But then he gets highly specific, targeting the exact things we tend to be proud of.
Let's say you are afflicted with pride in your intellect or your opinions. You think you are the smartest person in the room, the ultimate strategist.
Ibn Hazm's advice: force yourself to think about all your terrible ideas.
Think about the times you were absolutely 100% sure you were right about a political outcome, a business decision, or a personal judgment, and someone else turned out to be completely right.
He notes a brutal statistical reality here. For most people, if they are brutally honest with themselves, their mistakes, miscalculations, and bad guesses far outnumber their correct ones.
We just choose to forget the misses and highlight the hits.
When you deliberately remember the times you were dead wrong, the times you embarrassed yourself with a bad take, it becomes very difficult to worship your own brain.
What about pride in knowledge? Let's say you have multiple degrees, you've memorized vast amounts of text, or you are a renowned expert in your field.
Ibn Hazm says you must realize that your ability to retain information is a pure biological and circumstantial gift.
If acquiring knowledge were simply a matter of who studies the hardest, someone else who studies harder than you would automatically be smarter than you. But that's not how it works. Comprehension is a gift.
And he adds a surprisingly humorous but very sharp point here. He says an ignorant person is actually in a much better moral position than a conceited scholar.
Why? Because the ignorant person has a valid excuse for their mistakes. They simply didn't know any better.
But the scholar who is full of themselves has the knowledge of what is right and wrong and still falls into the trap of arrogance.
Their vast knowledge actually becomes a case against them, an indictment rather than a badge of honor.
I love how blunt he is. Let's look at his cure for pride in courage or physical strength.
This is so relevant today with gym culture, biohacking, and the obsession with physical optimization. You lift heavy, you train constantly, you are proud of your aesthetic and your physical power.
The text provides a brilliant reality check. Ibn Hazm says if you are proud of your physical strength, remember that a mule, a donkey, or a bull can carry vastly heavier weights than you ever could.
It completely shatters the illusion of physical supremacy.
He goes on. He says if you are proud of your speed, a dog or a rabbit can outrun you easily without even training.
The text argues that it is logically absurd for a rational human being to feel a sense of arrogant pride over a physical trait where they are effortlessly, naturally beaten by barnyard animals.
When you measure your core worth by pure, raw biology, speed, strength, size, you will always lose to the animal kingdom.
Your value as a human has to be rooted in your character, your intellect, and your spiritual state, not your muscles. Because a mule will always out-deadlift you.
Then Ibn Hazm tackles pride in wealth and power. You have the massive bank account, you run the company, you have the diversified portfolio.
He reminds us that at a fundamental level, wealth is literally just rocks, precious metals, or paper.
And here's the profound part. Those rocks and papers only actually benefit you when they leave your possession.
You only extract value from money when you spend it, when you trade it for something else. So why be incredibly proud of hoarding it? You are proud of guarding a pile of potential energy that is doing nothing.
And regarding power, or running a vast empire or corporation, he gives a powerful historical example to shrink the ego.
He tells the proud ruler to look at the king of Sudan from history, noting that this was an uneducated man who wore no clothes, yet he ruled over a geographic kingdom vastly larger than yours.
The point is not to demean the king of Sudan, but to point out that the sheer size of your domain or your budget does not equate to personal greatness or moral superiority. History is full of terrible people who ruled massive amounts of land.
What if you are proud of your lineage or ancestry? Maybe you come from a famous family, a long line of academics, or you have aristocratic roots.
Ibn Hazm dismantles this completely. He points out the harsh practical reality. Your noble lineage won't feed you when you are starving, and it won't cover you when you are freezing.
It is practically useless in the face of human vulnerability.
And more importantly, he says, look at the descendants of great prophets, legendary philosophers, or powerful righteous kings.
Historically, many of their direct descendants turned out to be terrible, low-character, corrupt individuals.
Greatness is not genetically transferable. You do not inherit virtue through your DNA. You have to earn your character yourself.
And finally, the cure for pride and beauty. You look in the mirror, you have perfect symmetry, you love your face, you spend thousands on skincare.
Ibn Hazm says, force yourself to think about the biological realities of the human body. Think about the inevitability of aging.
Think about the fluids, the waste, the sickness, and the things we are too embarrassed to mention in polite company that happen every single day as our bodies process food and slowly break down.
Your beauty is entirely temporary, highly fragile, and maintained by a very messy biological machine.
It is a ruthless, systematic deconstruction of every single thing a human being could possibly use to feel superior to someone else.
Ibn Hazm methodically strips away every layer of the ego's armor, until you are left with nothing but your bare humanity.
Which flows perfectly into how these concepts were immortalized in the culture, specifically in the wisdom of the literati, the poetry, and the parables of the time.
There is a story in the text about the overtalker that I think everyone can relate to.
It features a man named Rabia al-Rai. He was in a gathering, talking endlessly. He was clearly enamored with his own voice, his own vocabulary, and his own perceived knowledge, just completely dominating the room and sucking all the oxygen out of it.
We have all been in a meeting or a dinner party with someone exactly like this. They aren't having a conversation, they are holding a press conference.
Exactly. So Rabia, feeling very arrogant, turns to a Bedouin man sitting quietly next to him. The Bedouins were often seen as representing practical, grounded, unpretentious wisdom.
Rabia asks him, what do you consider eloquence?
The Bedouin replies simply, speaking little and hitting the mark.
A perfect, concise definition.
Then Rabia, trying to be clever and likely trying to bait the man, asks, and what do you consider inability or speechlessness?
And the Bedouin replies, exactly what you have been doing all day.
The text notes that this response was like feeding him a stone. It completely, instantly shut him up.
It is a beautiful illustration of how the conceit of the self-proclaimed expert is often easily punctured by the simple, unvarnished observation of reality.
Rabia genuinely thought his endless talking was irrefutable proof of his brilliance. The Bedouin saw it for what it actually was. Proof of his deep insecurity, his desperate need for validation, and his lack of actual distilled substance.
So what does this all mean? How do we synthesize all these ancient warnings, all this intense, sometimes uncomfortable self-reflection?
The text concludes with some poetic reality checks to help anchor us.
If we connect everything we've discussed today to the bigger picture, the poetry at the very end of the text is incredibly grounding.
It asks a profound, if slightly graphic, question to the listener. How can a human being walk around feeling arrogant when their head contains fluids? They are literally born from a microscopic drop of fluid. They carry biological waste in their bellies every single day they walk the earth, and tomorrow they will be buried and eaten by the dirt.
It takes you right back down to the literal earth. It reminds you that you are part of the natural decaying cycle of the world.
The text finishes with a quote from Ibn al-Muqaffa, an 8th century thinker who summarizes it perfectly.
He says that vanity is the disease of the intellect.
He notes that lowering your voice, being gentle, and walking calmly invite love from people, while self-admiration only invites hatred and isolation.
It is a profound, undeniable, social and spiritual truth. When you admire yourself, you build a wall that repels everyone else. When you humble yourself, you create open doors that draw people in.
This has been a massive, deeply reflective journey. We have unpacked so much today. We've learned that YouTube isn't just about boasting loudly to a crowd, it's a quiet, insidious, internal disease.
It's the deserted island of the ego.
It blinds you to your own flaws through spiritual amnesia. It literally destroys the value of your past good deeds, like fire eating dry firewood.
And it stalls your future personal growth by creating the illusion that you have already arrived.
But we also have the cures. By looking at Ibn Hazm's brilliant psychological tools, comparing our physical strength to animals, reminding ourselves that our wealth is just rocks that only work when given away, and deflating our intellect by actively remembering all our terrible past ideas, we can actively keep our ego in check.
And this raises an important question, something for you, the listener, to mull over as we wrap up. We have just spent this time exploring these rigorous, uncompromising, centuries-old warnings against extreme praise and self-admiration. But look at the world we live in today.
We live in a modern era where our daily technology and algorithms literally reward narcissism with dopamine hits and financial gain.
Personal branding is taught in universities as a requirement, forcing us to constantly broadcast our virtues to a digital audience.
Self-love has been heavily commodified into a billion-dollar industry.
So the question is, are we structurally engineering a society that suffers from the exact spiritual amnesia the ancients warned would destroy us?
How do you participate in the modern professional and social world? How do you advance your career or your art without letting this disease of the intellect quietly take over your heart?
That is a heavy, vital question we all need to sit with.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you leave with a new perspective, perhaps a slightly lighter ego, and a lot to think about. Keep questioning the world around you, and more importantly, keep questioning yourself.